Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult, video number 270, Reconciling Evolution with the Spiritual. This is sparked by Lionel the other day on Twitter, talking about evolution. I guess he's not a believer in it in maybe the macro sense. I might have that wrong. He tends to sometimes argue devil's advocate because he's a really smart guy, and so he just likes sort of the structure of argument over science and politics, I think. Really cool stuff. By the way, if you're not subscribed to Lionel Nation, you're definitely missing out. And that dude's a workhorse. I think he makes more videos each day sometimes than I do. Anyway, I figured that I would cover, from my perspective, as a spiritual individual at least, the reason why I believe fully in evolution. I do mean macroevolution. Yes, I believe that species are capable of transmutating into one another over time, and I'll tell you why. We can observe that microevolution is true. Even people who believe in like intelligent design or they're fundamentalists, they still acknowledge that things mutate and thus they can change over time, especially through the bottleneck effect, through mass extinction events. You get a situation where certain traits are selected for and certain are selected against. So if you have a broad population, half the individuals die and there's a heavy genetic skew in which ones have died, then you get what you could loosely call progress. Now keep in mind, progress isn't really used in the context of evolution, it's just change. This would be like Lamarck's giraffes, or you could say Darwin's giraffes. Of course, Darwinian evolution is the better way to explain it. The reason why the giraffes developed longer and longer necks is not because they tried to stretch their necks out. It's not because some spiritual entity zapped them or Anunnaki came and fucked the giraffes and changed their genetics. What happened over the course of hundreds of thousands, millions of years, is that those that had shorter necks died because there wasn't as much food available. Because of the trees in that area that they tend to predate upon being very tall with very little at the bottom, shorter giraffes have slim pickings. Taller giraffes can reach the top of the trees. They've got basically a high food resource capability as opposed to a very small food resource capability for the giraffes with shorter necks. If you have a mutation arise that dies in infancy and never reproduces, it's selected against heavily. Now, this is just sort of the basis of change in evolution. Imagine it happens to reproductive organs. And imagine that over time, something is being selected for against in the capacity of sexual reproduction. Over time, speciation will necessarily occur. Sometimes it's behavioral. And then, of course, you have a divergence of two potential groups that were once the same species. Sometimes it's behavioral. There are animals that are capable of producing offspring, including viable offspring, that simply don't interbreed because of behavioral differences. Again, the result of selection over time. Or the sexual organ might not be of the right size or the right shape. The chromosomes might not line up because of some mutation. Most mutations, by the way, kill. Most of them are deadly. Most mutations are deleterious. That's why we don't have Godzilla or King Kong or something. Again, just a standard biological understanding. I reconcile this with the occult, or with the spiritual, by saying I have no particular reason to believe that this process ongoing that I can, at least on the micro scale, observe, and with bacteria and so forth, you can kind of observe macroevolution after a fashion. If I can observe this, and if I can say that that process as well we can watch in extremely sped up with artificial selection, like 100 times faster if you're guiding the selective process and then breeding things, and you can make new flowers, new colors, and so forth, new types of crops. Keep in mind that kohlrabi and broccoli are basically from the same primordial mustard plant. You got a dozen different kinds of corn. They're all from teosinte. We've done that over only a few thousand years. When I look at that process and note that it is fundamentally true, and something that is more or less observable, again, at least on that microgenetic scale, I say, number one, as above, so below. So, the spiritual realm, obviously, whatever form it exists in, has no problem with this because it simply is as it is and happens to exist. Number two, I can't really find any argument against it, even among, like, religions. And religion and spirituality aren't the same thing, keep in mind. Being spiritual and believing in a cosmic sort of meaning or force or whatever is not the same as going to a church, listening to a priest or an imam or something, going to the temple and praying every day. But if I read the scriptures of these religions, I can't really find a direct argument against it, only if you take certain parts of like Genesis, for example. If you take it literally, then the world and the stars and everything were created over the course of a single week, in which man, by the way, arose at the same time. There can't really be evolution, although you can't argue against microevolution, but they would just call that change in traits within species. It's sort of a compromise thing that cherry-picking Christians tend to do, so that they can seem religious while not really fully believing in seven-day creation. If you take it literally, the world's 6,000 years old. There shouldn't have even been enough time for us to develop new corn strains yet, really. It shouldn't have happened because there's not enough time to actually, even through artificial selection, speciate things to that degree. But anyway, for most religions, you can't really find any solid argument against it. In fact, if you have these various deities that man has talked about through time, these various forces able to create new things, why would they be unable to create a process by which those things could change as well on a genetic scale? We know that genetics is real. It can't really be denied. I don't think anyone denies the existence of chromosomes and DNA. We can see it. We can literally observe it directly. Nobody really argues anymore against microevolution because, again, you can literally cause this to happen in a laboratory setting within a human lifespan. It's quite easy to see, actually. We do it all the time. We do it with plants. Genetic research, for example. We can take genetic material from one species, put into another. With advances in technology, there will eventually, I believe, come a point at which we can literally construct new life forms, new species, by compiling DNA in a computer. And through various chemical methods. I think that will happen. By the way, this opens up a can of worms because you could literally make dinosaurs. They might not be genetically exactly the same as the old T-Rex, but they would be basically the same. Yeah, you could make T-Rex. Yeah, you can breed woolly mammoths. Yes, it's possible to bring back Neanderthals. If you really wanted to do these things, they are at least feasibly possible with increases in technology over time. If this is at least possible, assuming the technology can be developed to actually compile the DNA, that would argue unfathomably in favor of evolution being real. Because you've just proved that there is no particular spiritual or physical blockage on new species arising. In fact, you've made it from scratch. You've almost done the godlike. That gets into totally different ethical arguments. For instance, de-extinction, and I made a video on this years ago. The idea of bringing back the woolly mammoth. I argue in favor of it as long as you can make multiple individuals so they can socialize and live a normal life. If you're just bringing one back to live in a cage, that I think is terribly wrong. It would be a blot on humanity, number one, and it would show that probably we're not deserving of that capability. Because, I mean, literally, that's like the argument of us being less hairy versions of chimpanzees who just happen to have nuclear weapons. It would be sort of a display of the worst of humanity, a symbol of our ultimate failure, our failure to act in an ethical, moral manner towards species that are incapable of actually voluntarily submitting to servitude. This goes into factory farming as well, but we'll save that for a different video. Maybe that's a good one, the morals of factory farming. Occult video 271. But yeah, I believe in evolution completely, including macroevolution. I also believe in the spiritual. Not in a church or necessarily a deity or something, but I believe that there is a meaning that goes beyond the mundane, easily described, very scientific. I believe that there is, if not a purpose, at least a reason behind existence, a structure to it. When I look at order and I look at existence around me, really it shouldn't exist at all if there's not. It never should have come about because you shouldn't be able to reach the point of creation on an infinitely long span of time. And if you have nothing before it, then that begs the question, how did existence itself come into existence? Spontaneously? No, I don't really believe that because it doesn't really make any logical, coherent sense. There's no physical framework we know of in which that can happen as well. If that's the case, I choose to believe that there is a sort of eternal existence, a uniqueness to the self, if you can call it that, maybe not the physical self in the sensory sense, but the self as in an entity that's capable of interacting in a physical manner through a body. You can call that a soul, a spirit, whatever you'd like to title it, that's fine. That's about all. Peace out.